Alexandra Feodorovna, the last Empress of Russia. Empress Alexandra was born on 6 June, 1872 at the New Palace in Darmstadt as Princess Alix Victoria Helen Louise Beatrix of Hesse and by Rhine, a Grand Duchy then part of the German Empire. She was the sixth child and fourth daughter among the 7 children of Louis IV, Grand Duke of Hesse, and his first wife, Princess Alice of the United Kingdom, the second daughter of Queen Victoria and her husband Prince Albert. Her mother gave her the nickname of Sunny, due to her cheerful disposition, a name adopted later by her husband. Her British relatives nicknamed her as Alexei, to distinguish her from her aunt by marriage, Alexandra, Princess of Wales, who was known within the family as Alix. In November 1878, diphtheria swept through the House of Hesse. Alix, her 3 sisters, her brother Ernst, Ernie, and their father fell ill. Elizabeth, Ella, Alix's older sister, was visiting their paternal grandmother, and escaped the outbreak. Alix's mother Alice tended to the children herself, rather than abandon them to nurses and doctors. Alice fell ill and died on 14 December, 1878, when Alix was 6 years old. This was the 17th anniversary of Alice's own father's death. Marie also died, but the rest of the siblings survived. She described her childhood before the deaths of her mother and sister as unclouded, happy babyhood, of perpetual sunshine, then of a great cloud. Queen Victoria doted on the motherless Alix and became a surrogate mother to her. She felt highly protective of Alix and declared that while I live Alexei, till she is married, will be more than ever my own child. She handpicked Alix's tutors and instructed them to send detailed reports back to Windsor every month. She invited Alix and her surviving siblings to England for their holidays, and they grew close to their British cousins. Every birthday and Christmas, she sent Alix gifts of dresses, jewelry, lace, and dolls. Unlike her other siblings, Alix signed herself your loving and grateful child, rather than grandchild, in her letters. Alix reflected that she saw Queen Victoria as the best and dearest of grandmamas, a very august person, a Santa Claus, and the dearest and kindest woman alive. When she was betrothed to Nicholas, Alix assured Victoria that my marrying will not make a difference to my love for you. When Queen Victoria died in 1901, Alix openly wept at her memorial service in St. Petersburg and shocked the Russian courtiers who considered her cold and unfeeling. In March 1892, when Alix was 19 years old, her father Grand Duke Louis IV died of a heart attack. Alix regarded the death of her father as the greatest sorrow of her life. For years she could not speak of him, and long after when she was in Russia, anything that reminded her of him would bring her to the verge of tears. Proposed matches. Queen Victoria greatly favored Alix and she wanted Alix to become the Queen Consort of the United Kingdom, which she considered the greatest position there is. On the 2nd of March, 1888, she wrote to Alix's oldest sister Victoria that my heart and mind are bent on securing dear Alexei for either Eddie or Georgie, respectively the second in line to the British throne, and his brother, the future George V, both of whom were Alexandra's first cousins. In 1889, Victoria invited Alix and Eddie to Balmoral in hopes that they would fall in love. Eddie grew infatuated with her and proposed, but Alix was not interested in him and rejected his proposal. Engagement. In 1884, Alix attended the wedding of her sister Elizabeth to Grand Duke Sergei Alexandrovich in St. Petersburg. At this wedding, the 12-year-old Alix met the 16-year-old Tsarevich Nicholas, nephew of the groom and heir apparent to the imperial throne of Russia. In his diary, Nicholas called Alix sweet little Alix and declared we love each other. He gave her a brooch as a sign of his affection, and they scratched their names into a windowpane. In January 1890, Alix visited her sister Ella in Russia. She and Nicholas skated together, met at tea parties, and played badminton. Nicholas wrote in his diary, "It is my dream to one day marry Alix. I have loved her for a long time, but more deeply and strongly since 1889 when she spent 6 weeks in Petersburg. For a long time, I have resisted my feeling that my dearest dream will come true." Alix's sister Ella and her husband Sergei were enthusiastically in favor of the match between Nicholas and Alix. Ella and Alix's uncle, the future King Edward VII, told his mother, Queen Victoria, that Ella will move heaven and earth to get Alix to marry a Grand Duke. Ella wrote to Ernest, "God grant this marriage will come true." Queen Victoria opposed the match to Nicholas. She personally liked Nicholas, but she disliked Russia and Nicholas's father and worried that Alix would not be safe in Russia. She wrote to Alex's older sister Victoria of her suspicions that Sergei and Ella were encouraging the match. After the betrothal was announced, she reflected, "The more I think of sweet Alex's marriage, the more unhappy I am. Not as to the personality, for I like Nicholas very much, but on account of the country and the awful insecurity to which that poor child will be exposed." Alexander and Maria Feodorovna were both vehemently anti-German and did not want Alix as a daughter-in-law. Maria Feodorovna told her sister Alexandra of Denmark that the youngest daughter of an undistinguished Grand Duke was not worthy to marry the heir to the Russian throne, and she believed that Alix was too tactless and unlikable to be a successful empress. Nicholas declared that he would rather become a monk than marry Margaret. She in turn was unwilling to convert to the Russian Orthodox Church from being Protestant. When his health failed in 1894, Alexander III decided to allow Nicholas to marry Alix so that he could secure the succession. Maria reluctantly permitted Nicholas to propose to Alix. Nicholas was ecstatic and immediately inquired about Alix. Despite her love for Nicholas, Alix was initially reluctant to marry Nicholas because she did not want to renounce her Lutheran faith to join the Orthodox Church. She wrote to Nicholas that "I cannot convert to Orthodoxy against my conscience, because what happiness can come from a marriage which begins without the real blessing of God?" Nicholas was devastated, but he remained hopeful because Ella assured him that Alix was utterly miserable and had a deep and pure love for him. Nicholas begged her not to say no directly and declared, "Do you think there can exist any happiness in the whole world without you?" Following the engagement, Alix returned to England and her grandmother. In June, Nicholas travelled to England to visit her and attend the christening of the eldest son of Prince George, Duke of York. Alix and Nicholas were both named as godparents of the boy, who reigned briefly as Edward VIII of the United Kingdom in 1936. Alix wrote to her old governess that "I am more happy than words can express. At last, after these 5 sad years, Nicholas declared that my soul was brimming with joy and life." In September, as Alexander III's health declined, Nicholas obtained the permission of his dying father to summon Alix to the Romanovs' Levadia Palace in Crimea. Escorted by her sister Ella from Warsaw to the Crimea, she traveled by ordinary passenger train. The dying Tsar insisted on receiving Alix in full dress uniform and gave her his blessing. On the 1st of November, 1894, Alexander III died at the age of 49. Nicholas was confirmed as Tsar Nicholas II. The next day, Alix was received into the Russian Orthodox Church as the truly believing Grand Duchess Alexandra Feodorovna. However, she was not required to repudiate Lutheranism. Alix wanted to take the name Yekaterina, but Nicholas wanted her to take the name Alexandra so that they could be a second Nicholas and Alexandra. He was inspired by his great-grandfather Nicholas I and his great-grandmother Alexandra Feodorovna. Alexandra, the Prince and Princess of Wales, and Nicholas's Greek relatives accompanied the coffin of Alexander III first through Moscow and St. Petersburg. The funeral of Alexander occurred on the 19th of November. On the 26th of November, 1894, Alexandra and Nicholas married in the Grand Church of the Winter Palace of St. Petersburg. Court mourning could be relaxed because it was the birthday of Nicholas's mother, now Dowager Empress Maria Feodorovna. Many Russians considered Alexandra a bad omen because she arrived so soon after the death of Emperor Alexander. "She has come to us behind a coffin. She brings misfortune with her." Alexandra herself wrote to her sister, "Our wedding seemed to me a mere continuation of the funeral liturgy for the dead Tsar, with one difference. I wore a white dress instead of a black one." Coronation. On the 14th of May, 1896, Alexandra and Nicholas were crowned at the Dormition Cathedral in the Kremlin. 500,000 Russians gathered in Moscow to watch the entertainment, eat the court-sponsored food, and collect the gifts in honor of their new Tsar. There were rumors that there was not enough food for everyone, so the crowd rushed towards the gift tables. The police failed to maintain order, and 1,000 Russians were trampled to death at the Kodinka field. Nicholas and Alexandra were horrified by the deaths, and they decided not to attend the ball that the French ambassador, the Marquis de Montebello, hosted in their honor. Nicholas's uncles urged him to attend so as not to offend the French and give credence to the rumors that the German Alexandra was prejudiced against the French. Sergei Witt commented, "We expected the party would be called off. Instead it took place as if nothing had happened and the ball was opened by their majesties dancing a quadrille." The British ambassador informed Queen Victoria that the Empress appeared in great distress, her eyes reddened by tears. The next day, Alexandra and Nicholas visited the wounded and paid for the coffins of the dead. However, many Russians took the disaster at Kodinka field as an omen that Nicholas's reign would be unhappy. Others used the circumstances of the tragedy and the behavior of the royal establishment to underscore the heartlessness of the autocracy and the contemptible shallowness of the young Tsar and his German woman. Rejection by the Russian people. Alexandra was extremely unpopular among her husband's Russian subjects. Her shy and introverted nature was interpreted as arrogance and coldness, and she struggled to win friends. The Russian court judged her as devoid of charm, wooden, cold eyes, holds herself as if she'd swallowed a yardstick. Alexandra struggled to communicate. She spoke English and German fluently, but she is said to have struggled to speak French, the official language of the court. Her letters and notes show that she could read and write French very fluently, however, and communication between herself and her children's French tutor Pierre Gilliard was always in French. Alexandra failed to understand her public role at court as the Empress. Traditionally, the Empress led the social scene and hosted numerous balls. However, Alexandra was shocked by the love affairs and gossip that characterized parties. She declared that the heads of the young ladies of St. Petersburg are filled with nothing but thoughts of young office, and she crossed off the names of noblemen and noblewomen whom she deemed scandalous from the invitation lists until no one was left. Many people in St. Petersburg society dismissed Alexandra as a prude. Alexandra had a difficult relationship with her mother-in-law, Maria Feodorovna. Unlike other European courts of the day, Russian protocol gave the Dowager Empress seniority in rank to the Empress. At royal balls, Maria entered on her son's arm and Alexandra followed on the arm of one of the Grand Dukes. Maria was so accustomed to the tradition that she was surprised when Alexandra was bitter about her junior role at court. The crown jewels were the property of the current Empress, but Maria initially refused to relinquish them to Alexandra. Maria begrudgingly surrendered the magnificent collection only after Alexandra threatened not to wear any jewels at all to official court events. Insecure about her modest origins as a minor German princess, Alexandra insisted on being treated with the full honors due to an empress. In 1896, Alexandra and Nicholas went on a European tour. When Wilhelm II lent her an antique silver tourette service that had once belonged to his grandmother, Queen Louise of Prussia, she was insulted and declared that only a gold service was suitable for an empress. She dressed herself with great magnificence. At the Russian court, courtiers mocked for her dressing in the heavy brocade of which she was so fond, and with diamonds scattered all over her, in defiance of good taste and common sense. Alexandra refused to court the public because she believed that the Russian people automatically loved and revered their emperor and empress. When she and Nicholas were traveling to Crimea by train, hundreds of peasants wore their best clothes and waited overnight to see the imperial couple. Nicholas went to the window and waved, but Alexandra refused to open the curtains and acknowledge the crowd. Dowager Empress Maria was furious that Alexandra thinks the imperial family should be above that sort of thing. What does she mean? Above winning the people's affection, and yet, how often she complains of the public indifference toward her. Queen Victoria worried about Alexandra's unpopularity in her new country, and she advised her granddaughter, "I've ruled more than 50 years, and nevertheless every day I think about what I need to do to retain and strengthen the love of my subjects. It is your first duty to win their love and respect." Alexandra replied, "You are mistaken, my dear grandmama. Russia is not England. Here we do not need to earn the love of the people. The Russian people revere their tsars as divine beings. As far as Petersburg society is concerned, that is something which one may wholly disregard." Struggle to bear an heir. On the 15th of November, 1895, Alexandra gave birth to her eldest child and daughter, Olga, at the Alexander Palace. Many Russians and members of the imperial family were disappointed in the sex of the child, but Nicholas and Alexandra were delighted with their daughter and doted on her. The birth of Olga did not change Grand Duke George's position as Nicholas's heir presumptive. The Pauline laws implemented by Tsar Paul I forbade women from taking the Romanov throne as long as any male Romanov was alive. If Alexandra did not bear a son, Nicholas's heirs would be his brothers and uncles. However, few worried because Alexandra was only 23, so she was expected to be able to bear a son soon. A few months after giving birth to Olga, Alexandra was pregnant again. Owing to the stress of the coronation, she had a miscarriage. No announcement was made, because she had not publicly confirmed her pregnancy. However, there were unfounded and malicious rumors in St. Petersburg that Alexandra had become pregnant by a lover and aborted the baby to hide her infidelity. On the 10th of June, 1897, Alexandra gave birth to her second child and daughter, Tatiana. Nicholas was overjoyed, but the members of his family were unhappy and worried. When she woke up from the chloroform, Alexandra saw the anxious and troubled faces around her and burst into loud hysterics. She cried, "My God, it is again a daughter. What will the nation say? What will the nation say?" Alexandra's failure to have a son made her even more unpopular among the Russians. Nicholas's brother George said that he was disappointed not to have a nephew to relieve him of his duties as heir. "I was already preparing to go into retirement, but it was not to be." On the 26th of June, 1899, Alexandra gave birth to her third child and daughter, Maria. Queen Victoria sent Alexandra a telegram when Maria was born. "I am so thankful that dear Alexei has recovered so well, but I regret the third girl for the country." Grand Duke Constantine fretted, "And so there's no heir. The whole of Russia will be disappointed by this news." Russians saw the birth of a third daughter as proof that Alexandra was bad luck. 2 weeks after Maria's birth, Nicholas's brother George died and their younger brother Michael became the heir presumptive to the throne. Courtiers flocked to Michael and treated him as the heir apparent, which distressed Alexandra. In October 1900, Nicholas became ill with abdominal typhus and was confined to bed for 5 weeks. The cabinet were forced to discuss what would happen if Nicholas died. Alexandra was pregnant with Anastasia, and she insisted that she be named regent in the hope that she would bear a son. However, Nicholas's ministers refused. If Nicholas died, Michael would become Tsar. If Alexandra's baby was a boy, Michael would renounce the throne in his nephew's favor. Alexandra was not satisfied and she grew to distrust Nicholas's ministers for trying to steal her future son's inheritance. On the 18th of June, 1901, Alexandra gave birth to Anastasia. Nicholas's sister, Grand Duchess Xenia, exclaimed, "My God, what a disappointment! A fourth girl." The French diplomat Maurice Paleologue reported, "The German Alexandra has the evil eye. Thanks to her nefarious influence, our emperor is doomed to catastrophe." The Russian peasants decided that the empress was not beloved in heaven or she would have borne a son. In 1904, Alexandra became pregnant. There was high anticipation for a son. As her due date drew near, a newspaper noted that a few days will decide whether the Tsarina is to be the most popular woman in Russia, or regarded by the great bulk of the people as a castaway, under the special wrath of God. On the 12th of August, 1904, Alexandra gave birth to Alexei Nikolaevich in Peterhof. Alexandra's health was never robust and her frequent pregnancies, with 4 daughters in 6 years and her son 3 years after, drew from her energy. She spent most of her time in bed or reclining on a chaise in her boudoir or on a veranda. This immobility enabled her to avoid the social occasions that she found distasteful. Alexandra regularly took a herbal medicine known as Adonis vernalis in order to regulate her pulse. She was constantly tired, slept badly, and complained of swollen feet. She ate little, but never lost weight, except for the last year of her life. She may have suffered from Graves' disease, hypothyroidism, a condition resulting in high levels of the thyroid hormone, which can also result in atrial fibrillation, poor heartbeat, and lack of energy. Hemophilia. Tsarevich Alexei Nikolaevich of Russia was heir apparent to the throne of Russia and the only son of Nicholas and Alexandra. Shortly after his birth, the court doctors realized that he had hemophilia. After his umbilical cord was cut, his stomach bled for days and his blood did not clot. Nicholas wrote that Alexei lost 1/8 to 1/9 of the total quantity of his blood in 48 hours. Hemophilia had entered the royal houses of Europe via the daughters of Queen Victoria, including Alexandra's mother, Princess Alice. In the early 20th century, hemophilia was often fatal and the average life expectancy of hemophiliacs was 13. Alexandra's brother, Friedrich, and maternal uncle Prince Leopold, Duke of Albany, had died young of hemophilia. Alexandra's sister Princess Irene of Hesse and by Rhine and first cousin Princess Victoria Eugenie of Battenberg were also carriers of the hemophilia gene and had hemophiliac sons. Alexandra felt immense guilt that she had passed down the disease to her son. Shortly after Alexei's diagnosis, she wept and told the nurse, "If only you knew how fervently I've prayed for God to protect my son from our inherited curse." Nicholas' sister Xenia called hemophilia the terrible disease of the English family, and members of the imperial family blamed Alexandra for contaminating the Romanovs with the diseases of her own race. As the incurable illness threatened the sole son and heir of the emperor, the imperial family decided to keep his condition secret from the Russian people. They wanted to limit social instability because of uncertainty. At first Alexandra turned to Russian doctors to treat Alexei. Their treatments generally failed. Burdened with the threats to her son from any fall or cut, Alexandra turned toward faith for comfort. She studied the Orthodox faith and saints and spent hours daily praying in her private chapel for deliverance. In 1912 Alexei suffered a life-threatening hemorrhage in the thigh while the family was at Spala in Poland. Alexandra sat for days at his bedside and she rarely ate or slept. She cried helplessly when Alexei begged for death and asked her to bury him in a forest instead of the mausoleum with his Romanov ancestors. The doctors expected Alexei to die and a priest performed his last rites. The court officials prepared an official telegram to announce the death of the Tsarevich. To the shock of his doctors, Alexei recovered his health and survived. World War I and Empress Alexandra. The outbreak of World War I was a pivotal moment for Russia and Alexandra. The war pitted the Russian Empire of the Romanov dynasty against the German Empire of the Hohenzollern dynasty. When Alexandra learned of the Russian mobilization, she stormed into her husband's study and said, "War. And I knew nothing of it. This is the end of everything." Alexandra's ties to Germany made her more unpopular among some societies in Russia. Her brother Ernest Louis ruled the Grand Duchy of Hesse and by Rhine, so he fought with the Germans. The German Emperor, Wilhelm II, was Alexandra's first cousin. Alexandra's sister, Irene, was married to Wilhelm's brother, Henry. Ironically, Alexandra was an ardent Russian patriot and disliked the German emperor. She privately wrote that Wilhelm II is really nothing but a clown. He has no real worth. His only virtues are his strict morals and his conjugal fidelity. Alexandra worked as a nurse to wounded soldiers, but her efforts went unappreciated. There were also rumors that Alexandra and Rasputin were carrying on nightly conversations with Wilhelm II in Berlin to negotiate a dishonorable peace. When Nicholas traveled to the front line in 1915 to take personal command of the army, he left Alexandra in charge as regent in the capital. Her brother-in-law, Grand Duke Alexander Mikhailovich, recorded, "When the emperor went to war, of course his wife governed instead of him." Ever a believer in autocracy, Alexandra persuaded Nicholas that he must never relinquish his absolute power as emperor. She wrote to him, "You are master and sovereign of Russia. Almighty God set you in place, and they should all bow down before your wisdom and steadfastness." She advised him to be Peter the Great, Ivan the Terrible, Emperor Paul crush them all. She criticized the Duma and declared they want to discuss things not concerning them and bring more discontent, they must be kept away. "We are not ready for constitutional government." During this conflict of 1916 to 1917, Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna reportedly planned a coup d'état to depose the Tsar with the help of 4 regiments of the Russian Imperial Guard, which were to invade the Alexander Palace, force the Tsar to abdicate and replace him with his underage son under the regency of her son Grand Duke Kirill Vladimirovich. There are documents that support the fact that, in this critical situation, the Empress Dowager Maria Feodorovna was involved in a planned coup d'état to depose her son from the throne in order to save the monarchy. The plan was reportedly for Maria to make a final ultimatum to the Tsar to banish Rasputin unless he wished her to leave the capital, which would be the signal to unleash the coup. Exactly how she planned to replace her son is unconfirmed, but 2 versions are available. First, that Grand Duke Paul Alexandrovich would take power in her name and that she herself would thereafter become ruling empress, The other version claims that she and Grand Duke Paul would replace the Tsar with his son, the heir to the throne, Maria's grandson Alexei, whereupon Maria and Paul would share power as regents during his minority. Reportedly, Empress Alexandra was informed about the planned coup, and when Maria Feodorovna made the ultimatum to the Tsar, the Empress persuaded him to order his mother to leave the capital. Consequently, the Dowager Empress left Petrograd to live in the Mariinsky Palace in Kiev the same year. She never again returned to the capital of Russia. Revolution, 1917. Alexander Kerensky was a key player in the new regime. The Duma informed the Tsar that day that he must abdicate. In an effort to put an end to the uprising in the capital, Nicholas tried to get to Petrograd by train from army headquarters at Mogilev. The route was blocked, so he tried another way. His train was stopped at Pskov where, after receiving advice from his generals, he first abdicated the throne for himself and later, on seeking medical advice, for himself and his son, the Tsarevich Alexei. Alexandra was now in a perilous position as the wife of the deposed Tsar, hated by the Russian people. Attempts were made by the mutinous Tsarskoye Selo garrison to storm the Alexander Palace, but it was successfully defended by the palace guards. The palace guards and other troops gradually left for the capital after being informed about the abdication, and Alexandra asked the Duma to put in place security measures for her and her household in view of the riots and violence in the nearby capital. On the 18th of March, Mikhail Rodzianko sent the newly appointed Minister of War, Alexander Guchkov, and General Lava Kornilov to Alexandra to inspect the security of the palace, which resulted in an officer being appointed to maintain the security of the palace as well as to act as a channel of communication between the palace and the Duma. After this, Alexandra noticed that the guards defending the palace gradually began to wear handkerchiefs around their wrists, signaling that they supported the Duma, which also meant that she and her children, while being defended from immediate harm, were nevertheless under de facto house arrest from that moment on. Alexandra and her children and household were not molested in any way, and the household was left to continue its everyday life as before, with the exception of occasional power cuts. On the 21st of March, Kornilov informed Alexandra that she was formally under house arrest, and the members of the household were informed that they were free to leave if they wished, but if they chose to stay they would have to obey the same rules as pertained to the house arrest of Alexandra. The following day, on the 22nd of March, Nicholas was finally allowed to return to the Alexander Palace at Tsarskoye Selo, where he was placed under arrest with his family. Alexandra told him that the husband and father was of more value in her eyes than the emperor whose throne she had shared. Imprisonment, 1917 to 1918. Greater security and more sympathy for the former Tsar. There were indications that the provisional government were actually attempting to transport them out of Russia by the Trans-Siberian Railway, thus fulfilling the government's wish to have them expelled, but now via a different route, after the first attempt to exile them to Europe had failed. However, this plan was not revealed to the family, and if it had indeed been the intent of the government, it had to be cancelled because of a strong Bolshevik presence in Yekaterinburg and other cities along the Trans-Siberian Railway east of Tobolsk, and the family therefore continued to their official destination. Alexandra and her family remained in Tobolsk until after the Bolshevik Revolution in November 1917. The fall of the provisional government and the Bolshevik succession to power greatly worsened their position. In 1918 they were moved to Bolshevik-controlled Yekaterinburg. Nicholas, Alexandra and their daughter Maria arrived at the Ipatiev house on the 30th of April, 1918. On entering their new prison they were ordered to open all their luggage. Alexandra immediately objected. Nicholas tried to come to her defense saying, "So far we have had polite treatment and men who were gentlemen, but now the former Tsar was quickly cut off." The guards informed him he was no longer at Tsarskoye Selo and that refusal to comply with their request would result in his removal from the rest of his family. A second offense would be rewarded with hard labor. Fearing for her husband's safety, Alexandra quickly gave in and allowed the search. On the window frame of what was to be her last bedroom in the Ipatiev house, Alexandra scrawled a swastika, her favorite good luck symbol, and penciled the date 17/30 April 1918. In May the rest of the family arrived in Yekaterinburg. They had not been able to travel earlier owing to the illness of Alexei. Alexandra was pleased to be reunited with her family once more. 75 men did guard duty at the Ipatiev house. Many of them were factory workers from the local's Lokazovsky factory and the Verkhysetsk factory. The commandant of the Ipatiev house, Alexander Avadeyev, was described as a real Bolshevik. The majority of witnesses recall him as coarse, brutish, and a heavy drinker. If a request for a favor on behalf of the family reached Avadeyev, he always gave the same response: "Let them go to hell." The guards in the house often heard him refer to the deposed Tsar as Nicholas the blood drinker and to Alexandra as the German bitch. For the Romanovs, life at the Ipatiev house was a nightmare of uncertainty and fear. The imperial family never knew if they would still be in the Ipatiev house from one day to the next, or if they might be separated or killed. The privileges allowed to them were few. For an hour each afternoon they could exercise in the rear garden under the watchful eye of the guards. Alexei could still not walk and his sailor Nagorny had to carry him. Alexandra rarely joined her family in these daily activities. Instead, she spent most of her time sitting in a wheelchair, reading the Bible or the works of Saint Seraphim. At night the Romanovs played cards or read. They received little mail from the outside world and the only newspapers they were allowed were outdated editions. On the 4th of July, 1918, Yakov Yurovsky, the chief of the Yekaterinburg Cheka, was appointed commandant of the Ipatiev house. Yurovsky was a loyal Bolshevik, a man Moscow could rely on to carry out its orders regarding the imperial family. Yurovsky quickly tightened security. From the imperial family he collected all of their jewelry and valuables. These he placed in a box which he sealed and left with the prisoners. Alexandra kept only 2 bracelets, which her uncle Prince Leopold, Duke of Albany, had given her as a child and which she could not take off. He did not know that the former Tsarina and her daughters wore concealed on their person diamonds, emeralds, rubies, and ropes of pearls. These would be discovered only after the executions. Yurovsky had been given the order for the execution on the 13th of July. On Sunday the 14th of July, 1918, 2 priests came to the Ipatiev house to celebrate the Divine Liturgy. Tuesday the 16th of July, 1918 passed normally for the former imperial family. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon Nicholas and his daughters took their usual walk in the small garden. Early in the evening Yurovsky sent away the 15-year-old kitchen boy, Leonid Sednev, saying that his uncle wished to see him. At 7 p.m., Yurovsky summoned all the Cheka men into his room and ordered them to collect all the revolvers from the outside guards. With 12 heavy military revolvers lying before him on the table he said, "Tonight, we shoot the entire family. Everybody." Upstairs Nicholas and Alexandra passed the evening playing bezique. At 10:30 they went to bed. The former Tsar, Tsarina, and all of their family, including the gravely ill Alexei, along with several family servants, were executed by firing squad and bayonets in the basement of the Ipatiev house, where they had been imprisoned, early in the morning of the 17th of July, 1918, by a detachment of Bolsheviks led by Yakov Yurovsky. In the basement room of the Ipatiev house Alexandra complained that there were no chairs for them to sit on, whereupon Nicholas asked for and received 3 chairs from the guards. Minutes later, at about 2:15 a.m., a squad of soldiers, each armed with a revolver, entered the room. Their leader Yurovsky ordered the entire party to stand. Alexandra complied with a flash of anger and Yurovsky then casually pronounced, "Your relatives have tried to save you. They have failed and we must now shoot you." Nicholas rose from his chair and had time to utter only what, before he was shot several times, not, as is usually said, in the head but in the chest. His skull bears no bullet wounds but his ribs were shattered by at least 3 fatal bullet wounds. Standing about 6 feet from the gunmen and facing them, Alexandra watched the execution of her husband and 2 manservants before military commissar Peter Ermakov took aim at her. She instinctively turned away from him and began to make the sign of the cross, but before she could finish the gesture Ermakov killed her with a single gunshot which, as she had partly turned away, entered her head just above the left ear and exited at the same spot above her right ear. After all the victims had been shot, Ermakov in a drunken haze stabbed Alexandra's body and that of her husband, shattering both their rib cages and chipping some of Alexandra's vertebrae. After the execution of the Romanov family in the Ipatiev house, Alexandra's body, along with those of Nicholas, their children and some faithful retainers who died with them, was stripped and the clothing burnt according to the Yurovsky note, a secret report by Yurovsky, which came to light in the late 1970s but did not become public knowledge until the 1990s. Initially the bodies were thrown down a disused mine shaft at Ganina Yama, 12 miles 19 kilometers north of Yekaterinburg. A short time later the bodies were retrieved. Their faces were smashed and the bodies, dismembered and disfigured with sulfuric acid, were hurriedly buried under railway sleepers with the exception of 2 of the children, whose bodies were not discovered until 2007. The Yurovsky note helped the authorities to locate the bodies. The missing bodies were those of a daughter, Maria or Anastasia, and Alexei. In the early 1990s, following the fall of the Soviet Union, the bodies of the majority of the Romanovs were located along with their loyal servants, exhumed and formally identified. Preliminary results of genetic analysis carried out on the remains of a boy and a young woman believed to belong to Nicholas II's son and heir Alexei and daughter Anastasia or Maria were revealed on the 22nd of January, 2008. The Yekaterinburg region's chief forensic expert said, tests conducted in Yekaterinburg and Moscow allowed DNA to be extracted from the bones, which proved positive, Nikolai Nevolin said. Once the genetic analysis has been completed in Russia, its results will be compared with test results from foreign experts. Nevolin said the final results would be published in April or May 2008. Certainty about the remains definitively put an end to the claim that Anna Anderson could be connected with the Romanovs, since all remaining bodies would be accounted for. DNA analysis represented a key means of identifying the bodies. A blood sample from Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, a grandson of Alexandra's oldest sister, Princess Victoria of Hesse and by Rhine, was used to identify Alexandra and her daughters through their mitochondrial DNA. They belonged to haplogroup H, mtDNA. Nicholas was identified using DNA obtained from, among others, his late brother Grand Duke George Alexandrovich of Russia. Grand Duke George had died of tuberculosis in the late 1890s and was buried in the Peter and Paul Fortress in St. Petersburg. Burial. Alexandra, Nicholas and 3 daughters plus the servants who were killed with them were reinterred in the St. Catherine Chapel of the Peter and Paul Cathedral at the Peter and Paul Fortress in St. Petersburg in 1998, with much ceremony, on the 80th anniversary of the execution.